and welcome back to, I forgot where we were, Bonfire Church. And tonight we're doing Bonfire with the Apostle John. So,
Yes.
but with the reason I do have a little bit of a icebreaker question for you,
Okay.
and I want to talk a little bit about siblings because
Mhm.
our last episode we did last week was on James.
Mhm.
The episode this week we're doing is on the Apostle John,
Yeah, his little brother.
his little brother. All right, so what is probably in your mind sticks out as the meanest thing? Because I know you're an older brother too, just
Mhm.
like I am. You ever did to your younger sibling?
Yeah, I'm definitely the oldest of all the siblings. I grew up with my one brother, Corey, and I think he probably received the brunt of it. So the worst thing, the meanest thing I ever did to him, um, I was coming down the hall. He came up the stairs and turned the corner, and I can't remember why. I still to this day don't know why. But I reared back and punched him right in the nose, busted his nose. He screamed and cried. Mind you, we were young. I mean, he must have been 5 or 6 years old at the time,
Ooh.
which means I was like 10 or 11. But I reared back and knocked him one good when I was in, I think, fourth or fifth grade. And then, of course, the second I did it, I had that pucker moment, like, what did I
Oh.
do? What have I done? And he's screaming. My parents come running. What happened? And I went. I stuck my hand out because he was running down the hall to stop him, and he ran right into my hand. Oh,
Mm.
I lied
Do you
like the
do you
devil.
know what the sixth commandment is?
Um, something about Snickers bars, I think. If that, no, that thou shalt not bear
No, I don't think it's the sixth. That might be the ninth. It might be the ninth. We'll,
false.
we'll
Is
look
it
those up
false?
later.
False witness? Is
False
that the one?
witness. We
Yeah,
should not,
I knew we were going
shall
with
not.
it.
And matter of fact, whenever we do disciple or evangelism, when we ever start like the good person test, right?
Yeah,
Is how many lies have you told? It's always the first one because
yeah,
everybody lies.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
you lied. But we'll
Well,
skip past that and
what's
we'll
great about that is
repentance
because it
later.
was very young. I was young, and lying came very naturally. I mean, I knew probably by that age not to
Oh
lie,
yeah,
but I didn't practice. That was very. I didn't even think about it.
no, it came
The
naturally.
lie was like bam
It
right
was
there.
ready to go.
Yeah, it
Ready to
says
go.
something very deep about the man's ability to sin being innate and ingrained.
Ingrained. I use covetousness. I say that because when you put two children in a room, and it doesn't matter if they're two infants,
Yeah,
they could be 6 months old. But if you put two of them in a room, and you give one of them a toy,
yeah,
see already in your mind you think that's not fair.
yeah,
Well, that's naturally.
hmm
So you realize as soon as you give one a toy and the other one you don't,
yeah.
the sin of covetousness is
hmm
already there.
Yeah,
It's already
as
there.
parents, we even think about it like as it's happening, like, "Oh, you better not do that. That's going to cause conflict."
Right, right.
Mm.
So I ask all of that to bring up John, but I do have mine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's
All
yours?
right. So I had a sister. I didn't have a younger brother. I only had a younger sister, and she took the brunt of the hit of a lot of things.
Uh huh.
Um, and most of it was not necessarily my meanness as much as a clumsy streak.
Mm.
And let me explain. So she would play sports with me, right? She's 4 years younger than I am. We would play like basketball.
Okay.
We play basketball. Well, usually I would always be the one to fall, and she would just be there to break my fall.
Well, lucky for you.
So she would fall, or I would fall on top of her, break, and I broke her leg.
Ooh.
And then another time we were out at my grandfather's house playing softball or baseball, and she was pitching the ball, and I was going to hit it home run.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody that's ever played softball with me before knows that I have a very distinct habit of any pitch that's thrown to me is going to be a line drive right for the pitcher's head, and I don't know how not to do that. Like I just know swing the bat and hit the ball. That's
Right.
what I want to do, and
Yeah.
every single time it's a line drive to the pitcher's head. This one was no different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although the problem this time was the pitcher was my sister.
Yeah.
And
I can see that being an issue.
so yeah, line drive right to her head. Yeah, we were in the emergency room for a while that night,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I sent her to the emergency
Those
room
pesky
a,
concussions.
a couple times, not on purpose.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if you were to ask her, she would probably have quite a few.
The list goes on and
Yeah,
on,
there's
is it?
probably a
Does it?
longer stories than those. Those are just ones that I remember of. That was probably
It's
bad.
it's it's nice to be the oldest.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it is or not, because you kind of get the first of everything. They try out a lot of things on the
You're
oldest.
right. You are the experimental
You're
child.
right, like that didn't work. They didn't work on you, so they try it differently with the other one.
Right.
So it's they,
My kids, not to get too far off topic, my kids say the same thing because Tyler got the brunt of it, right? And he was my experimental child. He's the
of
oldest,
course
and then Logan, he came along. Didn't get quite as bad. He had learned some
we learned
things,
some things, right?
and then now we got Haley, and she's like the golden child. Never gets in trouble. Well, she doesn't do anything wrong. We've kind of taught her everything. The other two were our experiments, and now we figured it out.
Well, they set the standard,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and when you have two boys first, and then you have a girl,
yeah.
I think you were set up for success in that regard, but could be failure.
Well, we'll see.
Uh,
It ain't over yet.
it's not over yet. But today we're talking about the Apostle John.
Yes, yes.
And the reason we talk about the younger siblings is John was the younger sibling of James.
Mhm.
And as we look in our words, I would almost think that maybe John's one of the younger.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that he was the youngest,
Yeah, I don't know.
but he was definitely in the lower echelons.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about James last week in regards to both he and John were in Jesus' inner circle.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a much closer relationship with than say the other nine disciples. So they saw everything that he did, and speculations as to why Peter, James, and John, and we can look at Peter and say, well, Peter was probably the oldest,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't doubt that as we look at James possibly being the second oldest.
Mm-hmm.
But why John as the youngest? Why John? And I know we brought up last.
Because you know how younger brothers are. Take me too. Take me too. Take me too.
Well, and I
That had to be it. That had to be it.
I wonder if there's not part of that too. Is it wasn't a situation where James
Why can't
was
I
brought
go?
along, and what about me? What about me? What about me?
Why can't I
But,
go? I want to
uh,
go.
But they both had a very close relationship with Jesus. They both got to see all of his miracles. But John is believed to be the disciple that Jesus loved.
Yeah.
Because I say that, and it's because it only appears in his gospel.
Yeah. Weird.
That only appears there. But there's been speculation, like there's also different people believe that James could be the disciple that Jesus loved. There's problems with that story because uh, at the end of after post resurrection, when Jesus is talking to Peter, and
Yeah.
we're kind of there in our Bibles already in John chapter 21.
Yep.
First, we have the restoration of Peter, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the end of that conversation, and we talked about it a little bit, but at the end of that conversation, Peter looks back and refers to the disciple that Jesus loved in the text and says, well, what about him?
Right.
And Jesus says, what if he
allow
remains
him to-
until
yeah.
I return, what is that to you? And I've even written on almost every Bible I have. That's Jesus essentially saying, mind your business.
Right.
Don't worry about it. So, with that being said, if it's between James and John, which one was the disciple that Jesus loved? Well, we have that phrase, that thing about that Jesus said there. And what sense would it make? I'm sorry, I sprayed that. For Jesus to make that statement about John and then him to be the first
Mm-hmm.
that was martyred. So it's highly doubtful that the disciple that Jesus loved in this reference was James,
Right.
because of that story that what he said to Peter. It would make no sense for
No,
James
it
to be
wouldn't.
the
As a
first
matter of
one.
fact, James was told when he was asking Jesus about the crucifixion and whatnot, and Jesus told James, "Can you drink from the cup that I'm going to drink from?" And James says, "Yes, yes, I can."
Right.
And he says, "Yes, and you will."
Yeah.
So in that regard, you've got a clear delineation of James being the first one to be martyred for
Yeah.
the cause, and John being the one who lived the longest. I think that's pretty cut and dry.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that too, and you don't see a lot about James
Right.
in John's gospel. James is in Matthew.
Mhm.
James is in Mark. James is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He's also in Acts. but he doesn't. He's nowhere in the Gospel of John.
Right.
So I almost wonder if that's not possibly like a little bit of is the sibling rivalry still that alive in that in the between the brothers?
Yeah,
You know,
could be.
because like I said, you look through the Gospel and James shows up nowhere in the Gospel, and then you have the self named title of the disciple that Jesus loved.
Right.
So we kind of can guess that's who this is. This is John.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, you think about the Gospel of John and the way that it's written and what it's all about, right? The deity of Christ.
Yeah.
That's what John is focused on, the deity of Christ. Um, James didn't write a gospel. James really didn't have a lot to do with Christ's coming, his death, his burial, his resurrection, the creation of all things. Where would James fit? You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like, where would he even put him in this story? Especially since John is not even talking about himself, really. He's just talking about Christ and how to establish the deity of Christ in his gospel.
Oh, absolutely. But that's a very good possibility. But when you say that, in my mind, I almost think that sometimes that's one of those situations where we over spiritualize it a little bit.
Yeah, could be. Yeah,
And I'm not saying that's wrong. It's very possible that that is actually the reason.
yeah,
But I'm interested in things like we have two brothers, and writes this gospel, and he's the disciple that Jesus loved. He's
yeah.
the number one disciple.
Right,
He's also the younger brother, but his older brother appears nowhere in there
right.
at all. So
Mm.
I often wonder the sibling rivalry
Yeah,
may run a little deep
it's
with those
certainly
guys.
things that make you go, hmm.
Absolutely. But the one thing about John is we know that he lived the longest.
Yes.
And as being the one that lived the longest, we know that with James, James, his brother, was the first disciple or the first apostle to be murdered. So
Right.
there's
Yep.
no book out there written by James.
Right.
There's no anything that's written down or recorded about James other than what the other disciples and apostles wrote.
Yeah.
But John, his younger brother, is figuring he got called about the age of 13 or 14 we
Right.
discussed earlier,
Somewhere in there.
and died around the age of 90.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good 70, 76 years in
Yeah.
ministry.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. 100 A.D. 100 A.D. is the believed death of
okay,
John.
yeah, yeah. Uh, well, I look at his contributions
Mm-hmm.
because you have the Gospel of John,
Right.
and I have to be honest. I think that's probably of all the Gospels, that's always the first one I go to. That's
Yeah.
always the first one I look at because I'm interested in the stories, but I'm also interested in I like the way John always ties it back to him being God,
Yeah.
him being the Messiah. So he wrote the Gospel of John, but then he also wrote First, Second, and Third John. Now there is
Mm-hmm.
some dispute there as whether or not he wrote First, Second, Third John, or if one of his disciples wrote First, Second, and Third John.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that disparity. That one's only there because there's a little bit of literature difference between
Right.
First, Second, Third John and the Gospel of John.
Right. And so after John was released from the Isle of Patmos, he went back to where was it? One of Paul's churches that he had established. It was Philippi, I think. Anyway, he went back, and that's where he ended up passing away from. But he was kind of an elder of the church. He
Right,
kind of
right.
kind of spent his twilight years doing that.
It's wild.
But he couldn't. He was no longer physically able to write and things like that. So a lot of scholars believe that period is when he was dictating First, Second, Third John.
And it's very possible.
Yeah.
Little things that I know. This is a personal thing that I notice about John. I
Mhm.
love the Gospel of John,
Yeah.
but there's one thing about it that really kind of crawls under my skin a little bit.
Mhm.
John's repetitive nature.
Oh yeah.
It almost feels like sometimes uh, you can almost hear the 13 or 14-year-old in his writings. And I don't mean it that way, but I mean it in a way of like it's almost like he says the same thing over and over, just putting a different emphasis
Yeah.
in some ways. You look at John 3:16. There's a lot of repetition there, but he gets his point across, and he gets it across thoroughly. So he's
Mhm.
very thorough
Right.
in his understanding of the theology. But as you look at I bring that up as a literary part of John that I noticed. But when
Mhm.
you look at First, Second, Third John, there's less of that there. There's a little more in first, and then second there's less, third is less. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you see it. To me, I see it back in Revelation, the kind of the repetitive nature of going over and
Well,
over and over
right,
again.
but that was written while on the Isle of Patmos.
Right.
right? So you've got the Gospel of John was written, then the uh, Book of Revelation, and then First, Second, Third John.
Right. Right. Yeah. They say it chronologically, yes.
Yeah,
As far as his age, though, so we can speculate, we can guess, and we can get it almost. We can probably get it within the average area,
yeah,
believed to be anywhere from 12 to 15.
hmm,
Most scholars say 12 to 20,
yeah,
but I think we've narrowed down a little bit. He would have probably been one of the younger on the younger end of the disciples,
right,
and
yeah,
also makes you wonder if that's not also why he was part of the inner circle, as not Jesus. Let me ask, just as an example, a youth in your church wants to come follow you in your ministry.
yeah.
And his older brother's coming along too.
Oh yeah,
Well, his older brother's going to make sure that everywhere he goes, his brother goes.
yes,
And Jesus may have made promises to Salome. You know,
yeah. Have you
again,
ever?
all that speculation. So I'm going to stop
Do
right
you,
there.
do you remember the commercial? There was a little doll thing back in the maybe 80s or 90s.
My buddy.
My buddy,
Oh,
my buddy, my buddy, my buddy. Wherever I go, he goes.
oh no.
So John, my little buddy, come on, let's go.
So I wonder if that's not part of the reason why he's kind of like, let's keep a special eye on the youngster.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and he lives a very, very long life.
Mm-hmm. Not for lack of trying.
No, it's definitely not for lack of trying, because there's several different opportunities they had to put him to death, and just he escaped every single
Yeah,
time.
gosh, what they tried to boil him in oil, right? What else? What other?
That was the last one. There was several others along the way, but the last one was they tried to boil him in a vat of oil,
Yeah,
and
there's so many
somehow he
things.
escaped from that as well. But when Jesus, the creator of the universe, just makes that little
Yeah,
passing
yeah.
statement.
What's that to you?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you
Was it?
mentioned.
Was this like I told you.
No,
Yeah.
this I feel like this was a. When you've been deployed, right?
Yeah.
Been on boat,
Uh-huh.
and a commander comes around, does his inspection. He's like, I don't really like the way that looks.
Mm.
What does that mean to everybody below him?
Fix it. Fix
It's
it
got
right
that
away.
right. So I want to say sometimes, if maybe what Jesus was talking to Peter about there was kind of that commander's intent,
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of like giving him, this is, what if this happens? If I let this happen, then that's on me. And everybody took that. But then we look at the facts.
Yeah.
The fact that all of them were martyred except
Except
for
John.
that one,
That's right.
except for John. So it lends credence to the claim that he is the disciple that Jesus loved.
Yeah.
So we'll go with a few scriptures here that I pulled up. I got John 13:23, and all of them, of course, going to be in this gospel we're already in.
Right.
John 13:23 says, one of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. John 19:26 declares, when Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, dear woman, here is your son. We remember that part, which I'll
Yeah.
cover a little bit more in a moment.
Yeah.
And then in 21:7, then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. And then, of course, as we look through the scripture, my favorite one is, the disciple that Jesus loved and Peter were racing to the tomb.
Oh yeah, that's always a fun one.
But he's never explicitly identified as John.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but
Nowhere does it say John is the disciple Jesus loved.
but every spot that it fits into, it's
Yeah.
like, it's got to be John. It's got
Yeah.
to be John. So in John 21:2, backing up a few verses from where we were, shows a time when Peter's getting ready to go out and go fishing. Now, this is after the Lord has been he's been killed, he's resurrected,
Right,
and
because
he
after
goes.
the execution, after the crucifixion of Jesus, all the disciples kind of go back to their lives. Right, they're like,
Yeah,
oh, I really don't know what to do now.
and
The fishermen went,
right.
well, let's go back to work.
And this is the part where I broke this down earlier about why it couldn't have been James and couldn't have been Peter, why they weren't the disciple that Jesus loved, because it specifically mentions Peter
Right.
throughout the book. And then, of course, we talked about the James dying earlier and John living much longer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Jesus didn't promise in that time, and I mentioned that a little earlier. He didn't promise that John was going to live together, but it would be very unusual for him to say, "If I want him to stay alive until I return, what's that to you?" And then him be the first disciple to die.
Right.
So that kind of takes against that. Church history will tell us that he lived to be about 90 years old
Mhm.
and is the last surviving apostle. Um, it also, like we mentioned before, early church tradition. So throughout all the traditions of all the years, this is one of those things where I talk about this homework's already been done, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Uh, Jesus was by the early church unanimously agreed and identified John as the disciple Jesus loved.
Yeah.
John seemed to have a closer relationship with Jesus than the other disciples. I almost wonder, again, as we're talking about, if he was the younger one, if it was a lot of closer mentorship with the younger
Mm.
disciple.
Mhm.
And in a way, as we read the text, it almost alludes to the fact that maybe Jesus and John are like best friends, BFFs.
Hmm.
Uh, because we see at the end, like we talked about before, and we could kind of touch on this for a minute, at the cross, we see John,
Yeah.
the disciple that Jesus loved, and
Mhm.
we see Mary, and Jesus entrusts his mother's care
Right.
to John.
Right, because what would have happened, had Mary not had, someone to care for her? In traditional, I guess, in Galilee and in
Yeah.
Judea and all this, the women didn't have jobs. They weren't employable. Mary had been following Jesus through his ministry, therefore had probably no property or finances of her own. Um,
Well, you also have to keep in mind too, her home was in Capernaum,
right. Yeah.
and we remember when Jesus stood up and he read from Isaiah, and then he says that this scripture has been fulfilled in your presence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it says from that point they try to walk him out to the area and stone him.
Mhm.
That's in his hometown.
Right.
So he's done that in his hometown. So now, what does that do for Mary?
Yeah,
Because
Mary
these
can't go back there.
everybody in this town knows Mary is his mother, and he just claimed to be the Christ.
Right. Not to mention because he's executed for blasphemy. Mom is now probably excommunicated already from
Right.
the synagogues, right? So she has to have a caretaker. Otherwise, she will be destitute and turn to a life of um, poverty,
Yeah.
where she becomes a beggar or something even worse, which a lot of women back then did.
It was interesting to see here too that Jesus is nailed to a cross.
Hmm.
He's got splinters digging into his back. He's in probably the more pain or agony than you and I could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
But he still has compassion on his heart for his family and his friends that are right there with the cross.
Hmm.
He still has that mentality of I have to care for her.
Doesn't that speak volumes to the "You shall honor your mother and father"?
It does.
I mean, in your worst possible moment.
It goes to the fulfillment of every jot
Yeah,
and
and tittle.
tittle of the law.
That's right.
Every single one will be fulfilled.
But yet we sit there and go, man, this is such an inconvenience that we have to deal with, medical stuff, or mom needs help moving furniture at her house, and oh my gosh, here we go again.
Yes, I
But
have a
here,
truck. No, I won't help you move.
yeah, but here Jesus is on the cross, bleeding out, about to die, taking on all the sin of the world, and goes, "Hey, mom, I got you."
Says a lot to first off, it says a lot to him as a son.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, he's the son of God,
Who fulfilled the law perfectly.
right? But he still honors his mother in this moment,
Yeah.
in this moment before he dies, and making sure that she's cared for.
Yep.
And it says from that point on that John takes her into his home
Mm.
and cares for him like she's his own mother.
Right. And why would John need to be almost impervious to pain and death, for as long as he shall live and die a
Mhm.
ripe old age?
Uh,
Uh,
but
thanks for
he
taking care of my mom, buddy.
yeah. But I mean, it's yet a lot of years, and you get to see a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but John was a significant confidant of the Lord's, and I say that
Hmm.
because you have Peter, James, and John. They witnessed the things like the transfiguration. They
Yeah.
witnessed so many things that they couldn't tell anyone.
Yeah. Which is, so the resurrection of, what's the guy's name's daughter?
Jarius.
Jarius.
Mhm.
Jarius's daughter. he goes in there. They witness this resurrection, which comes on the heel of another miracle. The heels of another miracle. The woman that couldn't stop bleeding. So this next resurrection, um, it's just a miracle followed by a miracle. Yet Jesus says, "Don't tell anybody this. Don't share this
Right.
that this happened." Doesn't tell just the disciples, but he tells the family as well. Hey, look, she was just sick. Now she's better. We'll leave it at that.
Right.
Wink, wink, hint, hint. Um, why? Why is that? Why would you not want that out? But that goes back to his master plan, right? You've got a series of events that has to happen
Well,
this way.
I think we have to remember too. The biggest part was it, how many times Jesus says, "My time has not yet come," and I think
That's right.
he, whereas we sometimes can jump the gun in our ministry and try to get involved way too early, or I've got a picture I send out, looks like a hyena that's been attacked by a lion, and it says, "This is what I look like when I'm coming back from a battle that the Holy Spirit clearly told me to not get involved in."
Right.
But he was a very trusted confidant of Jesus.
Yeah.
uh, Jesus like showed him a lot of things that the other disciples didn't see, uh, in regards to the miracles, in regards to signs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the transfiguration. That's while not a miracle, that's a pretty big thing.
Mm-hmm.
But John got as a youth got to witness these things. He got to witness it at that age, and that's what I wonder too. Because as we grow up,
Mm.
our brain processes things differently over the years.
Right. I'm picturing Peter Pan right now.
Well, the way I see things, the way I saw things at the age of 13. But back up, the way I saw things at the age of 35,
Mm.
I don't see them that way anymore.
Yeah.
So you have John here, who comes to know Christ at a very very young age.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to go through adolescence with Christ.
Right.
He's going to go through his young adult years with Christ. It's no wonder that by the time he reaches this age that he's written, so like he's got so much to say about
Mm-hmm.
Christ, because he's had a relationship with Christ through so many different areas of his life that he
Yeah.
knows more. He knows a Christ that none of us know.
Yeah.
He knows a Christ. He's been through things with Jesus that none of the other disciples went through,
Yeah.
because he went through it several different seasons of life
Yeah.
while following
And
Christ.
then he checks that box also about coming to Christ as though he were a child, which because he was a child, right? So if you come to Christ with that childlike mentality, that childlike faith, that awe, like we talked about
Yeah,
last time, is just
and
John's got something special right now, and
I
he's holding
wondered
on
that
to it.
too. I want you think, why was he the disciple that Jesus loved? Because he, if he was indeed the youngest, he would have had the rawest uh, mind to work with. He would have had
Yeah,
so much more available to give to Christ over those years.
yeah,
Where
you're right.
we look
Yeah.
at Peter was possibly in his 30s,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course he was killed. But you have John, who basically knew Christ 87% of his life.
Yeah, he hadn't. It's marksmanship is a good example of this. If you come to marksmanship, learning how to shoot a rifle or learning how to shoot a gun for
Mm.
the first time, you've never fired a weapon. You've
No
never
bad
understood.
habits.
You've got no bad habits. John comes to this with no bad habits. Yes, they were taught the Torah, but it's just being taught the Torah.
Right.
There's no practice of the Torah until you've become an adult or a little bit further along. So if he is fresh out of Torah school, he has spent his entire life learning the first 5 books of the Bible, and then picks up with Jesus.
Right.
From that moment on, he has lived nothing but Christ his
Yeah.
entire life. Whereas the other ones have a moment in there where it's split up. They've got Torah, they've lived the first 5 books of the Bible, and then they turn and get life.
Mhm.
They go to work, they go to marriage. Some of them they interact with priests, and they go to temple, and they do all these things, and they start getting bad habits.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to teach somebody. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. John is fresh. John is ripe, and he is right in the right place, the right time, specifically for, I believe, all that he is able to accomplish through the text and whatnot to
Yeah,
teach us.
yeah. Well, I want to move. I want to fast forward a little bit. We've talked about how young he was, and we talked about he dies at the age of 90.
Yeah, 100
And,
AD.
and
Hmm.
I don't want us to think for a second that to try to allude to the idea that John was just smooth and escaped a lot,
No,
um, or that he was fearful and ran and hid all the time.
nope.
Absolutely not,
No, they
because
tried to kill him.
he wasn't he wasn't he didn't live to that ripe old age by it was definitely by an accident,
Hmm.
because he was tried many times. But in the Bible doesn't really tell us exactly how he dies, but we do have a few fan theories, if you will.
Right.
All right. So John was arrested in Ephesus,
Yep.
and martyred when his enemies threw him in a boiling oil basin.
Yeah,
Um,
which did not affect him.
however, according to tradition, John was miraculously delivered from death.
Yep.
Huh. Then he was sentenced to slave labor in the mines of Patmos.
Hmm.
So John, on an island in the southern Aegean Sea, had a vision of Jesus Christ, and that's where we get the book of Revelation.
Hmm.
So the Apostle John was later set free, and most likely because at this point he's working in the mines. So let me ask you, you just say if you get convicted and you're working in the mine at your age, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
and then they convict another guy and put him to be your working with you in the mines, and he's 89 years old.
Yeah.
How much work do you expect from the 89-year-old?
Not much.
Not much.
Not much.
So he's actually set free due to most likely old age. That's the only other thing we can figure, because he didn't stop. It's not like he said, "Okay, I deny Christ now."
No.
What he did not turn his back.
So actually, there's a little bit of not just early church history, but actual history from this. The first, and I don't have the documents in front of me, but so forgive me, but I believe it's the second um, second major persecution of the church before the main event, if you will. There was a period of peace within Christianity, within the followers of the way,
Okay.
and it was because a certain uh, Roman emperor, certain Caesar, came to power. I don't remember the name, and they released John. So John was set free because of uh, this peace, if you will, this call for peace.
Okay.
So John was set free. He goes from where he was to Philippi, I think. I don't remember for sure. It might have been Ephesus.
Uh,
Um,
present day Turkey.
right.
So that's I think that's where he's buried, is present day Turkey,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. But anyway, he goes back to one of these other churches and kind of just joins, and lives out his last days there.
Right.
But that's why he was released, is because of that emperor that came into power. It was before Constantine, and before the main persecution of the church. There was two little persecutions,
Right.
then
Right.
a
Yeah.
period of peace, and then the big persecution. During that period of peace, that emperor was the one that set him free.
Okay. But so it was sort of during a time of peace.
Yeah,
Odds are, I'm looking at it, if I'm an emperor, he's gonna be the first one I let go, because
he's
the
old.
he's
Yeah,
he's
what's
no
he gonna
danger.
do?
And while all these theories do exist, there's neither the historical nor biblical evidence to support any of them.
Right. Yeah.
So we have several different speculations on how old he was and how he actually died, so on and so forth.
Mm.
But the biggest thing for us to remember is the same thing we talked about last week with James, is while John looks a lot more successful because he lived a very long life,
Mm-hmm.
he died with nothing. So the essential thing to remember is the fact that he was not ashamed of Christ,
Right.
and he was willing to die for his faith. He didn't have to,
Yeah.
but he was willing. He didn't
Yeah. He didn't
evade.
know that he wasn't going to get burned by that oil.
He did not evade.
Nope.
He did not evade capture. He did not evade death. He knew that it was. He knew that that was part of what would. He actually expected it.
Yeah.
You got to figure, by his 70th birthday, when Peter's gone, Andrew's gone,
Mm-hmm.
Philip's gone, all the other disciples are gone. He's the only one left.
Yeah.
It seems to me like at that point, you're probably praying for death.
Yeah.
that you would want to join your brothers, you know.
Yep.
Uh,
To
but
live
John,
as Christ, to die is gain.
but John knew. He knew that Christ rose from the dead. He
Yep.
knew that, and there was nothing he would rather die
Mm-hmm.
than to deny that fact ever happened. So yes, it is believed Ephesus. You said Ephesus early.
I think it's
Ephesus
Ephesus.
is current day Turkey.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I had it in that earlier note as current day Turkey, but I have it here as
I couldn't remember if it was
Ephesus, which
Philippi
is
or Ephesus. I knew it was like because it's named after one of the books of the Bible,
right.
Philippians or
It was one of
Ephesians.
or Galatia, something
Yeah,
like
one of those places.
but it was buried in Ephesus, which is present day Turkey.
Okay.
According to early Christian,
Yes, that word. Yep. Early church
according
tradition.
to early Christian tradition, John spent his later years in Ephesus, where he is thought to have died and been buried at an old age.
Yep.
So his basic, I'm not going to say that word, his tomb is located in the ancient city of Ephesus. I don't know why I wrote that word down. I wasn't going to say it.
Uh,
And this tradition held significance for centuries and remains a place of interest. So it's still a very popular place for people to go visit.
yeah.
Is to meet, or to go where the Apostle John was.
Yeah. And in the early church, one of the things that they used to do, they called it the Catholic Church, but it wasn't the. It was the Big C Catholic, not the Little C Catholic that we have now. Big C meaning universal.
Ah,
So Catholic being universal church. One thing that they used to do is they used to collect artifacts. John, I believe one of John's bones or something like that was brought to the Church of Rome at one point before the popehood got established and all that stuff. The papacy was established. That was one of the main things that was brought, along with there were some garments and the crown of thorns was one of the things. So all these different artifacts were collected, believing that they had special powers.
hmm. I
Just a
didn't.
cool tidbit of information. Just pointless and had no relevance, but I thought I'd
I didn't know that.
throw it in there.
One of John's bones.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually look this one up. What would John have to say to the present church?
What would John say to present church? Man, what happened? I thought we wrote it down.
I feel like he would challenge us in a way
Yeah.
that's.
That's what I mean. I think he would say, "Hey, what happened, guys? We gave you the book. We wrote it all down for you. Did you not read it? Did you not
I feel
understand
like
it?"
there's going to be some sarcasm there. Did you not understand the words?
Yeah. Did you not understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Did you not understand what we wrote? But you always wonder that. What would these apostles, if they, we bump into them in heaven, what's the first thing John's going to want to talk to us about?
Yeah.
And
I feel like he has a lisp.
I feel like I would be interested to know what it's, because I remember my teen years and needing guidance.
Yeah.
Needing
Not
that
wanting
guidance,
it,
but
but needing it.
having not only Christ as my mentor and as my rabbi, but also have such a close relationship with him during those years of your life.
Right.
Imagine what that does to an adult, a teenager who's been through adolescence with Christ. I can't get over that.
Well, just look
You
at
know-
the Big Brothers of America movement.
Right,
You
right.
know, there's
And
kids
the raising
out
of
there
kids,
that
yeah.
needs some guidance, some male role models, and
And this is no crack on Zebedee. This is not to say that Zebedee was a failure as a father in
no,
any
of
way,
course
shape, or
not.
form.
But he's not Jesus.
But exactly, he's not the Messiah. So to almost be raised by the Messiah,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
you're going to have that complex of I'm the one he loves,
Mm-hmm.
because he basically raised me,
Yeah.
So, but you got to have a love for John. You got to as you look through it, and even when you take into consideration that he has a self-proclaimed title
Yeah.
that only his gospel gives.
There is one alternative aspect, an alternative perspective, if you will, for this this self-proclaimed title, right? The disciple that Jesus loved. When you talk about justification through faith, right, and then sanctification, which follows, the common understanding is that justification happens immediately. That is the moment that you receive salvation, you are justified.
Mhm.
Then sanctification is the process of accepting that, right? So you work towards a better understanding and a growth, but all of it points back to saying, I was justified.
Right.
I've been given this gift. Sometimes I wonder, and I know this is a popular concept as well. If John didn't go, all the stuff that I did, all the rumbling that I did,
Mm.
all the mistakes that I made, and he loves me. I'm the disciple Jesus loves. Did he love all the disciples? Absolutely, he did. But in this moment, could this be considered John going, I can't believe it, but he loves me. I don't know why, but he loves me.
You and I want to make this real for a second before we close in
Yeah.
prayer. You and I have had some conversations this week about what's going on with this ministry.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, we make it too much about uh, how much attention we can get, how
Mm,
much traction we can get, and those kind of things.
yeah.
But we look at John. How many times do you? And let me back up a little bit. Earlier this week, I was telling you about how discouraging it can be sometimes when you make all these plans and you do all these things. And you want to serve the Lord, and then the day comes of that event, and you're the only one there,
Mm,
and it feels like there's nobody else on board with you, and
yeah.
and that's me thinking that now, and I think to John.
Yeah.
John died at 90 something years old. He was exiled on the island of Patmos.
Right.
How many times do you think he got discouraged?
Oh, yeah. Well, he was completely alone writing his gospel. He was completely alone writing Revelation.
But he never let that discouragement derail him from what he was doing.
Nope.
He was never embarrassed of the Christ. He always preached the message. Even when it got him exiled and dipped into oil, allegedly,
Hmm.
he still kept preaching.
Yeah.
And he never let anything slow him down. Even, I guarantee you, there were times where he was standing in a cave preaching to himself because nobody else was there.
Yep.
And
That's
I
right.
think we look at John, he lived that long and he never wavered on his faithfulness. And I think that we here in this ministry can do the same thing.
Because he always reminded himself, I'm the disciple Jesus loved.
And so are we.
It's right.
You want to close this in prayer?
Let's do that. Father God, we just thank you. And we claim that title as being the one that you love. We claim that for us. We claim that for these watchers, these listeners, these ones who join us in this ministry as well. Father, we know that you love each and every one of us, that you knit us together in our mother's womb. You knew us before you even hung the stars in the sky. Father, we thank you that you have never left us astray, yeah, that you have continually guided us and protected us and provided for us in ways that we don't even know about, ways that we can't even fathom. Father, thank you for giving us your word to help us draw closer to you and help us to always remember to come to you with a childlike faith, like John, who just relied upon you as a father, as a friend, as a disciple, with all the awe and wonder still in our eyes. Father, we ask all of this today in Jesus' name. Amen.
And as always, don't just keep the faith.
Give it away.